Hello there everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Botox Games. Today I want to talk about the Nintendo success pattern theory. This is something I've seen people talk about a lot over the years, but as we are ramping up with the Switch 2 looming on the horizon, I've seen it brought up more and more. This past week specifically, I saw a lot of people talking about it on social media, so I thought I'd weigh in and kind of debunk it and also just talk about it with you all because I think it's just kind of a funny, silly thing that people are really kind of attached to, not seriously. Like, I know no one's like really like reading this list and these numbers as like their Bible, right? They're not like really that attached to it, but it is something I've seen brought up so many times over the years that I wanted to talk about it a little bit and, like I said, kind of debunk it. So the theory is this, right? Every Nintendo home console since the GameCube has kind of alternated whether it's a big success or a big failure. The GameCube, massive failure. The Wii, massive success. The Wii U, massive failure. The Nintendo Switch, massive success. And that's basically it. Those four consoles in alternating patterns of being successful and not successful, that has led a lot of people to like kind of look at this and analyze it and think, oh, well, maybe because the Switch was a massive success, the Switch 2 will be a failure. But that's not really, well, first of all, it's not how it works, obviously, just for obvious reasons that, that just doesn't make any sense. But that's not really the truth of the equation, so to speak. Like, that doesn't really check out because the Nintendo Switch is a handheld. The Nintendo Switch should not be compared against the Wii U or the Wii or the GameCube. The reality is Nintendo's home console business ended in 2017 when they stopped manufacturing Wii U's. They might call the Switch a console themselves, but it does not matter. It is a handheld. It is the successor to the 3DS, it inherited the portable DNA from the Game Boy and DS lines of systems, and most importantly, it took its place in the market. It took the place of the 3DS in the markets as the handheld from Nintendo. You can play it on your TV, sure, and most people do, but it is a portable device when there are no other portable Nintendo devices on the markets, and it has Pokemon on it. Mainline Pokemon is like the ultimate system seller. There is no world where a Nintendo handheld device flops miserably when it has a mainline Pokemon game on it, on top of a myriad of other factors. I mean, Nintendo is bigger now than it's ever been. They're more profitable now than they've ever been. They have movies coming out. They have a theme park. There's really no world where the Switch 2, or the successor to the Switch, is a failure. But I guess if you look at this pattern, I mean, it might be kind of true for their actual home consoles, but for it to really make sense, you kind of have to look past the fact that the Nintendo 64 and GameCube were both relatively big failures. The GameCube sold about 20 million and the Nintendo 64 sold about 30 million, which is still like really bad. Then you have the Wii after those two, which was a massive success, as we all know. It was the best-selling 7th generation console, but that's kind of an anomaly, because right after that, they went back to the Wii U, which was their all-time worst-selling systems. In fact, if you remove Wii from the equation, the pattern, if you want to call it that, was that every single Nintendo home console since the NES was selling worse and worse. We have the NES at 62 million units sold, the Super Nintendo at 49, Nintendo 64 at 33, sorry, I was a little low earlier, the GameCube at 21.7, and then the Wii U at 13.5. So with the major exception being the Wii, every Nintendo home console sold steadily worse. But here's the thing. What if we look at those same stats, but for the handheld lines? Going all the way back to the Game & Watch, that sold 43 million, which is crazy. I mean, that was a ton of different devices, of course, so that kind of makes sense that there are several different people buying several different units of Game & Watch systems in Japan, of course, back then. But then we had the Game Boy / Game Boy Color, which Nintendo kind of lumps together. That's at about 118 million units sold, which is worth noting that the Game Boy was on the market for like 11 years, so it had 2 generations of Pokemon, it was the Tetris machine. It makes sense that the Game Boy sold really stinking well. Then we have the Game Boy Advance, which sold 81 million units. We'll circle back to that in just a second. Nintendo DS at 154, Nintendo 3DS at 75, and then of course Nintendo Switch at 139. So while it might not necessarily be an incline in sales for each handheld successor, the sales are good. They've never had a handheld do poorly. The lowest sales there, not counting the Game & Watch because that's kind of its own thing, the lowest thing there is the 3DS, which sold at 76 million units, or 75.94. That is not a failure by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, it's a little rough coming off the DS, which sold 154, but 75 million units is still nothing to scoff at. That is not in any way, shape, or form a failure of a console, especially when you consider the rocky launch the 3DS had. I mean, it launched at $250, which is way more than the DS was, and it took 6 months for them to drop the price. It wasn't really until the new 3DS came out, and then honestly, really the 2DS that came out in 2013, that the 3DS kind of got its footing back around the time that Pokemon X and Y came out, around the time that, Fire Emblem Awakening and Link Between Worlds and Mario and Luigi and all these games were kind of starting to hit. It wasn't until then that the 3DS really turned ship around. So 75 million for a console that had that rocky of a start, not bad at all. And as for the Game Boy Advance, it sold 80 million units with like, what, 3 years on the market as like the Nintendo handheld, because the DS came out very early, which obviously Nintendo knew was the right choice because they knew something was going on. They knew they had to get that DS out there before the PSP to do something truly different, and it worked for them splendidly. But had the Game Boy Advance not, been cut off too short, that would have sold over 100 million units. Absolutely. It wouldn't have been as big as the Game Boy, I don't think, but it would have done very, very well. And 80 million, once again, is still very good. Though I guess, to be fair, if we're really truly being thorough with our analysis here, the Virtual Boy is technically a handheld, and that, yeah, that didn't do too well, did it? I just think it's funny to see people saying, like, oh, the Nintendo's next console might be a failure. They can't replicate the success of the Nintendo Switch. And I'm just like, they haven't really had trouble in the past replicating success for their handhelds. There might be a little dip here and there, but I mean, going from the gargantuan DS to the 3DS back to Switch, which is on track to outsell the DS, I don't think that's bad at all. Will the Switch 2 sell as well as the current Switch? Probably not, but I don't think it's impossible, and I certainly don't think it's going to be anywhere close to a failure on the scale of the GameCube or even the Nintendo 64. And hey, if we're going to count these still high numbers as failures, it's certainly going to do better than the NES or Super Nintendo. Nintendo would have to mess up so badly for this thing to sell that poorly. I mean, it would have to be, honestly, even if they release it at $500, I feel like it would still, over time, eventually hit that number as console generations keep getting longer, as tech, advancements keep getting less and less important, I think, for most consumers, right? Nintendo's probably going to release a Switch 2. That thing's going to be their main device for, I mean, if we're approaching, 8 years with the current Switch, I could see the Switch 2 lasting that full 10, 11 years, unless something goes poorly, which, I mean, it's possible, but when you look at all of their other handhelds, I just don't really see that being even a possibility. This is going to be the thing that has your mainline 3D Mario, 3D Zelda. You're going to have your mainline Pokemon, Splatoon, Animal Crossing. A lot of the issue in the past with Nintendo's home consoles was that they just couldn't balance properly releasing games on 2 different platforms. So for GameCube, it was Game Boy Advance. For DS, it was Wii. Of course, both of those did very well, but especially when you look at the Wii U and 3DS, they had a lot of trouble balancing releases between both of those, as the 3DS was able to do 3D platformers and 3D adventure games and stuff like that. I mean, Xenoblade is on the 3DS, and then later we saw ports like Yoshi's Woolly World and Mario Maker and even stuff like Captain Toad. So it became clear that they needed to just consolidate all of their effort into one device. And like I said earlier, with Nintendo releasing these billion-dollar making movies and having a theme park, they have a huge partnership with Lego now. It would take some sort of catastrophic mistake for Nintendo to release a failure of a console for the foreseeable future. I mean, the industry would have to completely change to the point where no consoles are selling, I think, for Nintendo to have a console fail at this point. So that is the Nintendo success pattern, and that is what I wanted to talk about today, just kind of debunk it. I know, like I said earlier, it's not like something people really abide by. It's not like some real thing people really focus on, but it is funny because I have seen it come up over and over again since around the time the Switch came out, really. And I've always thought it's funny because it's like, every Nintendo handheld is successful. The Switch is just continuing that trend, even if they do technically classify it as a home console. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How do you feel about this whole little pattern theory? And do you think the Switch 2 or the Switch successor will be a success? For me, I just look at how Nintendo is right now. They're doing better than they ever have. I don't know what they could do to mess things up, to be honest. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch news, discussions, theories, all of that fun stuff. Check out my new channel at It's Amiibo. I posted a video on Thursday about rare Switch games you should buy before they get expensive. That video did way better than I expected, so that channel is already off to a great start. I really do appreciate the support over there, and I, of course, appreciate the support on this channel as well. And, of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames. But until next time, folks, peace.